Kevin thought the soundproofing was strong enough to hide the moans coming from the West Wing guest suite. He actually believed introducing his mistress as a strategic advisor would fool me, but he forgot this house runs on a biometric security system that I, the sole admin, quietly reactivated at 3:00 in the morning. When the sun rises, Kevin will realize he has not just lost a place to sleep, but his entire life. My name is Janet Broadwell, and for 34 years I have perfected the art of being underestimated to the world, and specifically to my husband Kevin. I am a moderately successful interior designer working at a boutique architecture firm downtown. I drive a reliable Volvo. I clip coupons for organic produce, and I defer to Kevin when he talks about market trends over dinner. Kevin likes to feel like the provider. He likes to believe that his salary as a sales director supports our lifestyle. What Kevin does not know, or perhaps chooses to ignore in his convenient delusion, is that the firm I work for is a subsidiary of a holding company I own. The Volvo is a choice, not a necessity. And this sprawling estate we live in, a Georgian revival masterpiece sitting on 10 acres of prime real estate, was not purchased with his commissions. It has been in the Broadwell family for 4 generations. I am the sole heir to the Broadwell real estate empire, a portfolio worth nearly $3 billion. But I learned long ago that money attracts parasites. So I keep my net worth buried under layers of trusts and shell companies. I wanted a marriage built on love, not leverage. Unfortunately, it seems I have neither. The charade began on a Tuesday evening. The driveway sensors alerted me to Kevin's arrival at 6:00. I was in the kitchen arranging hydrangeas in a vase, playing the role of the beautiful wife. When the heavy oak front door opened, the air pressure in the house shifted. It wasn't just Kevin. There was a second set of footsteps. The sharp staccato click of high heels on the marble foyer. "Janet, are you home?" Kevin's voice carried a pitch slightly higher than usual. It was his sales voice, the one he used when he was trying to close a deal that was falling apart. I walked out to the foyer, wiping my hands on a tea towel. Standing next to my husband was a woman who looked like she had been manufactured in a laboratory designed to destroy marriages. She was tall with hair the color of spun gold and a suit that fit her a little too perfectly for a business meeting. "I am right here," I said, offering a warm practice smile. Kevin stepped forward, placing a hand on the small of the woman's back, a gesture too familiar for a colleague, but subtle enough to be plausible. "Annie, this is Sasha. She is the strategic restructuring expert from Meridian Global. I told you about the merger project is entering the critical phase, and headquarters flew her in this morning. A pleasure to meet you, Janet," Sasha said. Her voice was smooth, like expensive scotch. She extended a hand. Her manicure was floorless, a deep ox-blood red. "Kevin speaks so highly of your taste and decor." I took her hand. It was cold. "Welcome to our home, Sasha." Kevin mentioned things were getting intense at the office. Kevin laughed. A nervous barking sound. Intense is an understatement. We are looking at 18-hour days for the next 3 weeks. The problem is corporate messed up her housing reservation. Every decent hotel within 20 m is booked solid because of the tech convention. He paused, looking at me with wide, pleading eyes. "Since we have so much room," I suggested Sasha could stay in the West Wing. "It would save us hours of commuting time, and we can work late without worrying about the drive." The lie was so thin I could see right through it. Meridian Global was a massive conglomerate. They could buy a hotel if they needed a room. I did not blink. I did not frown. I simply widened my smile. "Of course," I said, "the picture of gracious hospitality. We would hate for the merger to fail because of logistics. The West Wing is perfectly private. You will have your own entrance, a kitchenette, and complete quiet." I watched Sasha's eyes dart around the foyer. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the crystal chandelier, the original oil painting by a Hudson River School artist hanging above the console table, and the silk Persian runner beneath her feet. It was a look of hunger, not just for my husband, but for my life. "You are too kind," Sasha said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I promise I will be invisible. You will not even know I am here." "Oh, I am sure we will get along just fine," I replied. I led them to the West Wing myself. The estate was designed in a U-shape, with the main residence in the center and two wings stretching out like welcoming arms. The west wing was originally built for visiting dignitaries in my grandfather's time. It was separated from the main house by a long glass-enclosed gallery and a heavy set of double doors. It was soundproof, luxurious, and most importantly, isolatable. As we walked, Sasha complimented everything: the crown molding, the drapery, the view of the rose garden, but every compliment felt like an appraisal. She asked about the security system, framing it as a concern for her corporate laptop's safety. It is top of the line, I assured her. Biometric scanners, motion detectors, thermal imaging. My grandfather was paranoid, and I have kept the upgrades current, but do not worry. I will add your biometrics to the guest protocol, so you can come and go as you please. I saw a flicker of relief cross. He thought he had won. He thought I was the naive architect wife who spent her days drawing pretty lines, oblivious to the fact that he was moving his mistress into my house right under my nose. That night after Sasha had settled in, I sat in my study reviewing the security feeds on my private server. The guest protocol I had given Sasha was real, but it was also a tracking device. I watched as she unpacked. She didn't unpack files or laptops first. She unpacked laundry, lace, silk, sheer fabrics that had no place in a corporate restructuring. Later, I joined them for a light dinner in the main dining room. The dynamic had already shifted. Kevin was bolder now. He poured Sasha's wine before mine. When they spoke about work, they used buzzwords that meant nothing: synergy, paradigm shifts, vertical integration. But their eyes were having a completely different conversation. This house is just massive, Sasha said, swirling her Pinot Noir. Do you ever get lonely here when Kevin is traveling? I enjoy the quiet, I said, cutting my steak with precision. It gives me time to think and to manage the estate's inventory. We have quite a few valuables that require regular maintenance. Sasha's ears practically perked up. Valuables like the paintings and documents, I said, dropping the first crumb of my trap. My family deals in bearer bonds and rare deeds. In fact, I just brought a stack home from the bank vault today to audit them. I keep them in the wall safe in the library. I saw Kevin stiffen. He knew about the library safe, but he did not know the combination. He also knew that I rarely kept liquid assets in the house. The greed in the room was suddenly palpable, thick enough to choke on. Is that safe? Kevin asked, trying to sound protective but failing, with a guest in the house. No offense, Sasha. None taken, Sasha said quickly, her eyes gleaming. It is fine, I said, waving my hand dismissively. The combination is just my birthday. I am terrible at remembering numbers, so I keep it simple. Besides, who would look in a library safe behind a copy of Moby Dick? It is such a cliché. I laughed, a light, airy sound. They laughed with me. But as I took a sip of my water, I watched them exchange a glance. It was a look of predatory excitement. The truth was the safe behind Moby Dick was not the real safe. The real safe was hidden behind the wainscoting in the floor. The wall safe was a decoy I had installed 2 years ago for this exact purpose, to test loyalty. Inside, I had placed a stack of papers that looked like bearer bonds, but were actually high-quality fax miles I used for training interns, along with a glittering but ultimately synthetic diamond necklace. I was inviting them to steal from me. I was handing them the shovel to dig their own graves. Well, Kevin said, pushing back his chair. Sasha and I should probably head to the West Wing. We have a conference call with the partners in Tokyo at 9:00. Go ahead, I said. I will clean up here. Do not work too hard. I watched them walk away, their shoulders brushing against each other as they moved down the hallway toward the glass gallery. They thought I was the perfect victim, a wealthy, oblivious wife who would let them play house under her roof while they plotted to take everything I had. I waited until the heavy doors of the West Wing clicked shut. Then I walked to my office and pulled up the interface for the smart home system. I watched on the screen as the heat signatures of 2 people moved from the guest living room into the guest bedroom. There was no conference call with Tokyo. I took a deep breath. The anger was there, a cold, hard knot in my chest, but I pushed it down. Panic is for amateurs. Revenge is for professionals. I had 3 weeks to let them hang themselves, and I intended to enjoy every single second of the show. The intrusion was legitimized. Now the surveillance would begin. The house began to whisper to me, not in words, but in shifts of atmosphere and displaced air. It started with the scent. It was subtle, the kind of thing a person without my specific training and details might miss. But to me it was as loud as a siren. Kevin would return to the main house from the West Wing around 11 at night, claiming exhaustion from analyzing spreadsheets. He would smell of ozone and printer toner, or so he claimed. But underneath the artificial scent of office work, there was a base note of something floral and musk-heavy. It was Sasher, a custom blend of jasmine and ambition that clung to the fibers of his cashmere sweater. He would kiss my cheek and the smell would transfer to my skin, a marking of territory I was not supposed to notice. Then came the visual disturbances. I returned home early one Thursday afternoon from a site visit, my car rolling silently up the service drive to avoid alerting the household. From the vantage point of the library window, I watched the rose garden. Mr. Henderson, our head gardener, who has been with the Broadwell family for 40 years, was standing by the prize-winning hybrid tea roses. He looked agitated. Standing over him, pointing a manicured finger at the trellis, was Sasha. She was wearing a silk robe that I recognized. It was not hers. It was a vintage piece from my mother's collection that I kept in the guest linen closet, intended for emergency use only. I cracked the window open just an inch. "No, you are not listening to me." Sasher's voice drifted up, sharp and imperious. "Kevin said he wants these ripped out. They are too old-fashioned. We want something modern here. Ornamental grasses. Something sleek." Mr. Henderson looked as though he had been slapped. "Madam, these bushes are 60 years old." "Mrs. Broadwell, Mrs. Broadwell is not the one dealing with the renovation strategy." Sasha cut him off. "Just do it by Monday." I closed the window. My heart did not race. Instead, my pulse slowed down, steady and rhythmic, like a predator stalking prey. Kevin had not authorized any renovations. He knew better than to touch the gardens. This was Sasha testing the perimeter fence, seeing how much power she could wield before the alarm tripped. When I walked into the living room an hour later, I noticed a Louis. The 15th armchair had been rotated 45 to face the window, and a stack of Architectural Digest magazines. My magazines had been thrown into the recycling bin. She was nesting. She was erasing me from my own home while I was still living in it. I did not confront her. I did not scream at Kevin. To react emotionally would be to give them the advantage of knowing I knew. Instead, I went shopping. I did not buy clothes or jewelry. I purchased 6 high-fidelity micro-optic surveillance units disguised as decorative polished stones and beetle-shaped garden ornaments. They were military-grade, capable of capturing audio from 50 ft away and video in 4K resolution, transmitting directly to a cloud server encrypted with a key only I possessed. On Saturday, Kevin announced an all-hands crisis meeting in the West Wing. "It is the Tokyo merger," he said, looking suitably stressed while adjusting his tie in the mirror. "They are threatening to pull out. Sasher and I have to pull an all-nighter to restructure the debt proposal. Do not wait up for me, you poor things," I said, smoothing his collar. "I will make sure the staff does not disturb you. I will even turn off the intercoms so you can focus. You are the best," he said, kissing my forehead. The kiss felt dry, like dead leaves. As soon as they left, I waited 10 minutes. Then I walked to the perimeter of the West Wing. The patio doors were locked, but I had the master key. I slipped inside the sunroom, my movement silent. I placed a stone camera in the soil of the fiddle-leaf fig tree in the corner. I placed another, the one shaped like a small bronze cicader, inside the intricate chandelier above the dining table. I moved to the living area and tucked a third unit into the deep recess of the bookshelf, right next to the faux leather binders they had set up as props. It took me less than 5 minutes. That night, I sat in my private study on the second floor of the main house. The room was dark, lit only by the glow of my iPad Pro. I poured myself a glass of vintage Bordeaux, a bottle worth $800 that Kevin would never appreciate, and put on my noise-canceling headphones. I tapped the screen, and the West Wing came to life in high definition. The scene was not one of frantic work. There were no spreadsheets on the table. The The crisis documents were used as coasters for sweaty glasses of whiskey. Kevin was lounging on the sofa, his feet up on the coffee table, shoes still on, while Sasha paced the room, holding the diamond necklace I had left in the decoy safe. "It is smaller than I thought," Sasha said, holding the stones up to the light. "Are you sure this is real?" "It is real enough for now." Kevin laughed. He sounded different. The anxiety was gone, replaced by a bloated, ugly arrogance. "That is just the junk she keeps in the walled safe. The real money is in the trust. I saw the quarterly statement on her desk last week. The liquidity event triggers next month, and you're sure you can access it?" Sasha asked, dropping the necklace onto the table with a careless clatter. She walked over to Kevin and sat on the arm of the sofa, running a hand through his hair. "Baby, look at her." Kevin sneered. "Janet is a ghost. She walks through life with her head in the clouds, drawing her little buildings. She trusts me implicitly. I am already listed as a secondary signatory on the operational accounts. Once I get power of attorney, which I will under the guise of managing the estate so she can focus on her art, we can drain the liquid assets into the shell company in the Caymans before she even notices the balance has changed." I took a sip of wine. The tannins were perfect, dry and structured on the screen. My husband was outlining the destruction of my heritage. "She is a golden goose," Kevin continued, swirling his drink. "A stupid, flightless golden goose. She thinks I'm working my tail off for us, for our future. The only future I'm investing in is the one where we are on a beach in Brazil and she is wondering why the checks are bouncing." Sasha threw her head back and laughed. It was a harsh metallic sound. "I almost feel sorry for her. She actually made me cookies yesterday." "Does that?" "It is pathetic. It is convenient," Kevin corrected. "She is so desperate to be the perfect wife. She is handing us the keys to the kingdom. We just have to play the game for 2 more weeks. Can you handle 2 more weeks of pretending to be a consultant for $10 million? Sasha grinned. "I would pretend to be a nun. I watched them toast to my ruin." I watched Kevin pull her into his lap, his hands roaming over her with a possession he had never shown me. They mocked my clothes, my quiet nature, my devotion. They dissected my life and assigned a dollar value to every piece of it. I paused the video. I zoomed in on Kevin's face. I studied the confidence in his eyes, the absolute certainty that he was the smartest person in the room. He had no idea that the secondary signatory status he was so proud of was for a monitoring account with a daily withdrawal limit of $500. He had no idea that the quarterly statement he saw was a fabrication I had planted. I did not cry. Tears are a biological response to grief, and I was not grieving. I was working. I took a screenshot of Sasha holding the necklace. I took another of Kevin holding the whiskey bottle, my father's whiskey. I saved the video file to 3 separate secure servers. The wine tasted excellent. The cracks in their play were no longer hairline fractures. They were gaping holes, and through them I could see the rot underneath. They thought they were hunters. They did not realize they were simply fattened calves grazing in a field that I had already mined. I closed the iPad cover with a soft click. The investigation phase was effectively over. I had the motive. I had the intent. Now I needed the forensic details to make sure that when I dropped the hammer, it would shatter them completely. I finished my glass of wine and went to bed, sleeping the deep, restful sleep of a woman who knows exactly what she has to do next. The morning after I secured the video evidence, I did not go to my office at the architecture firm. Instead, I drove 45 minutes north to the financial district, pulling into the private underground garage of the monolith that housed Harrison, Sterling, and Vance. Arthur Harrison has been the Broadwell family attorney since before I was born. He is 70 years old, wears bespoke 3-piece suits, and possesses a mind like a steel trap. He is not the kind of lawyer you call for a traffic ticket. He is the kind you call when you need a problem to cease existing. I bypassed the receptionist and walked straight into his corner office. Arthur did not look up from his desk immediately, but when he did, his expression shifted from professional detachment to grave concern. He saw the look on my face. It was the look of a client who was done negotiating. "Janet," he said, standing up to "What do I owe the pleasure you usually call before dropping by? I need you to activate the forensic unit I said, placing a flash drive on his mahogany desk. I want a full audit on Kevin, bank accounts, credit lines, digital footprints, and every single movement he has made in the last 6 months. And I need a background check on a woman calling herself Sasha from Meridian Global. I want it deep. Arthur, I want to know what she ate for breakfast in third grade. Arthur picked up the drive, turning it over in his hand. Is there a specific trigger event adultery is confirmed? I replied, my voice steady. But I suspect corporate espionage and attempted embezzlement. I want to know exactly how much he has stolen before I file the papers. Arthur nodded once. He pressed a button on his intercom. Get me the guys from the cryptic analysis team and tell the private investigation unit I have a priority alpha case. The efficiency of a team that charges $1,500 an hour is a terrifying thing to behold. Within 48 hours, the dossier was ready. I returned to Arthur's office to review the findings. The room was cold, air-conditioned to preserve the ancient law books lining the walls. Arthur sat across from me, a thick-bound document in front of him. He looked angry. For a man who had seen everything, that was rare. It is worse than we thought. Janet, Arthur said, sliding the document toward me. Much worse. I opened the file. The first tab was labeled Assets and Liabilities. Start with page 4, Arthur instructed. I turned the page and felt the blood drain from my face. It was a mortgage deed, a second mortgage on the Aspen Vacation Villa, my favorite property, the one my grandmother left specifically to me. The loan amount was for $2 million. At the bottom of the page was a signature, Janet Broadwell. I never signed this, I whispered. We know, Arthur said, his voice clipped. The forensic handwriting analyst confirmed it is a forgery within 10 seconds. A decent one, but a forgery nonetheless. Kevin used a forged power of attorney and a notary in a strip mall in New Jersey, who has since lost his license for unrelated fraud charges. We can prove it in court easily. Where is the money? I asked, dreading the answer. Gone, Arthur said flatly. Kevin transferred the full $2 million into a cryptocurrency exchange platform based in the Bahamas. He bought into a speculative token that crashed 98% in value 3 weeks ago. He was trying to short the market and got eaten alive. The Aspen house is currently at risk of foreclosure if the payments are not met, which they haven't been for 2 months. I stared at the numbers. $2 million vaporized because my husband wanted to play Wolf of Wall Street. There is more, Arthur said, pointing to the next tab. Look at the corporate filings. I flipped the section. It was a draft for a legal transfer of ownership. It was a deed of gift document prepared and ready for filing with the Secretary of State. The document outlined the transfer of 51% of my shares in my architecture firm to Kevin Broadwell as a spousal appreciation gift. It claimed that I was stepping down due to mental fatigue and wished for my husband to manage the asset. He was going to declare you mentally unfit if you refused to sign. Arthur explained, his tone deadly calm. We found search queries on his laptop for power of attorney for incapacitated spouse and involuntary commitment procedures. He wasn't just planning to steal your company, Janet. He was planning to institutionalize you to do it. The room spun for a second, but I forced it to stop. This was not a betrayal of the heart anymore. This was a declaration of war. Kevin had moved from being a cheating husband to a hostile combatant. And the woman I asked, closing the financial section, who is the restructuring expert? Arthur actually chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Yes, Sasha. Or as the state of Nevada knows her, Monica Stevens. He pulled out a glossy photograph. It was a mug shot. The woman in the picture had darker hair and less makeup, but the eyes were the same, predatory and cold. Monica Stevens is a career grifter, Arthur recited from memory. She has 3 outstanding warrants in Las Vegas and Reno for romance scams and insurance fraud. Her modus operandi is consistent. She targets mid-level executives with access to company funds but low oversight. She convinces them she is a high-powered consultant or an Aries, helps them embezzle money, and then blackmails them for the rest of it. If that fails, she tips off the authorities anonymously and vanishes with her cut. She is not his partner. I realized a cold smile touching my lips. She is his executioner. Precisely. Arthur said, Kevin thinks He is running a scam on you with her help. In reality, Monica is running a scam on Kevin. She is likely waiting for him to liquidate whatever assets he can get his hands on, namely your trust fund access, before she takes the cash and leaves him to face the felony embezzlement charges alone. I looked at the stack of papers, 200 pages of evidence, wire transfers, forged documents, chat logs, and criminal records. It was enough to put Kevin in federal prison for 15 years. It was enough to destroy his reputation permanently. But is the play? Janet Arthur asked. We can go to the police right now. I can have a squad car at your house in 20 minutes. I shook my head slowly. No, police are too messy. If we arrest him now, it becomes a public scandal. The Broadwell name will be dragged through the tabloids. I will be the pitiable heiress whose husband stole from her. I do not want pity. Arthur, I want a rar. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city skyline. Kevin wants a party. He wants to celebrate his success. He thinks he has won. I want him to feel the height of that victory before I pull the ground out from under him. I turned back to Arthur. Draft the divorce papers, full fault, no alimony, and prepare a civil suit for the $2 million plus damages, but do not file them yet. Keep them in your briefcase. I need you to come to the house on Saturday morning around 7:00. Arthur raised an eyebrow. Saturday morning. That is oddly specific. It is the morning after his party. I said, I am going to let him have his night. I am going to let him believe he is the king of the castle. And then when he wakes up, I am going to make sure he realizes he is just a trespasser. And Monica, Arthur asked, leave Monica to me. I said, or rather, leave her to the FBI. Do you have a contact at the Bureau who handles interstate fraud? I have the assistant director on speed dial. Arthur replied, good. Tell him I have a present for him. A fugitive with a penchant for vintage diamonds and other people's husbands. Tell him to be at my gate at 7:15. I picked up the dossier. It felt heavy, like a weapon. One last thing, Arthur, I said, pausing at the door. The mortgage fraud. Since the bank failed to verify the signature, we can void the debt. Correct. We can, Arthur confirmed. The bank will have to eat the loss for their negligence. But Kevin will still be on the hook for the criminal act of forgery. Perfect, I said. I want him to have nothing, not even debt. Just nothing. I walked out of the office and into the elevator. The investigation was over. The facts were irrefutable. Kevin was not just a cheater. He was a liability that needed to be liquidated. I checked my watch. It was 2:00 in the afternoon. I had a party to plan, and I needed to make sure it was an event Kevin would remember for the rest of his very short life. Kevin found me in the sunroom on Wednesday evening, vibrating with a manic sort of energy that he usually reserved for closing a sale, or as I now knew, lying to my face. He told me that the merger project with Meridian Global had hit a breakthrough milestone, and that the team needed to celebrate. He suggested a small gathering on Friday night to honor the hard work Sasha had put in. I knew exactly what Friday was. It was not a corporate milestone. According to the credit card statements I had pulled from his secret account, Friday marked exactly 6 months since he had paid for a romantic weekend getaway in Napa Valley with a woman named Monica Stevens. He wanted to throw an anniversary party for his mistress in my house, using my money under the guise of a business dinner. That sounds wonderful, Kevin, I said, looking up from my sketch pad with a serene smile. You have both worked so hard. Let me handle the arrangements. I will call the caterers we used for the charity gala. If you are going to celebrate, you should do it in style. Kevin looked relieved, almost giddy. Are you sure it might be a bit loud? Just some of the guys from the office and a few partners. I insist, I said, standing up to adjust his tie. I want to support you. Put it all on the house account. By 7:00 on Friday, the main hall of the estate had been transformed. I had ordered 36 cases of vintage champagne and a seafood tower that cost more than Kevin's first car. The guests arrived in a fleet of leased luxury sedans. They were Kevin's friends, a collection of mid-level managers and sycophants who wore suits that were too shiny and laughed too loudly at unfunny jokes. I played the role of the gracious hostess to perfection. I drifted through the room in a simple black dress, filling glasses and accepting hollow compliments. Sasha or Monica as I now thought of her, was the center of attention. She wore a red dress that was aggressively tight, standing next to Kevin as if they were the couple hosting the event. At one point, I moved toward the terrace doors to signal the wait staff to bring out the hot orders. The heavy velvet curtains were partially drawn, obscuring me from the group of men standing near the bar. "I have to hand it to you, Kev," I heard a voice say. It was Mark, Kevin's college roommate and current compliance officer. "You have got stones the size of boulders bringing her here, with the wife upstairs." Kevin laughed, the sound of ice clinking against glass punctuating his arrogance. "Janet, she is clueless. She thinks Sasha is helping me save the company. The woman lives in a fantasy world of fabric swatches and color palettes. I could park a tank in the living room and tell her it was a modern art installation, and she would believe me and the prenup." Another voice asked, ironclad. "Or so she thinks," Kevin scoffed. "But once I move the liquid assets, the prenup is just a piece of paper. She will be lucky if I leave her the Volvo." I stood frozen in the shadows. The sheer malice of it took my breath away. It was not just greed. It was contempt. He despised me for the very generosity I had shown him. I forced my breathing to steady. I did not retreat. I walked through the curtains, a tray of crab cakes in my hand. "More appetizers, gentlemen?" I asked, my voice light and airy. Kevin jumped, spilling a drop of his drink. "Janet, we didn't see you there." "Obviously," I said, smiling with my teeth. "I was just checking on the service. Mark, how is your wife? Still recovering from the surgery?" Mark turned pale. "She is fine, thanks." I walked away before the silence became awkward. I had heard enough. The climax of the evening came at 10:00. Kevin clink-kicked a spoon against his champagne flute, calling for silence. He stood in the center of the room, one arm around Sasha's waist in a way that defied professional boundaries. "I want to make a special toast," Kevin announced, his face flushed with alcohol and triumph, "to Sasha. Without her vision and strategic brilliance, this project would be dead in the water. She has been my rock." The room applauded. Sasha beamed, looking down with false modesty. "And as a token of appreciation from the team," Kevin continued, reaching into his jacket pocket, "I wanted to present you with this." He pulled out a black velvet box and flipped it open. Inside lay a diamond necklace. It was a platinum chain adorned with 3 carats of marquise-cut diamonds. The room gasped. I did not gasp. I stopped breathing entirely. That was my necklace. It was a family heirloom given to me by my grandmother on my 21st birthday 6 months ago. Kevin had told me it had been stolen while I was away at a conference. He claimed he had filed a police report, but that the insurance company had denied the claim due to a lapse in coverage. I had believed him. I had comforted him when he cried about letting me down. And now he was draping my grandmother's diamonds around the neck of a fugitive con artist in my own living room. Sasha touched the stones, her eyes glittering with greed. "Oh, Kevin, it is beautiful. You shouldn't have." "Only the best for the best," Kevin said, kissing her on the cheek. The rage that filled me was cold and absolute. It was no longer a fire. It was a glacier crushing everything in its path. I watched them pin. I watched them celebrate their theft, and I decided that mercy was no longer an option. I slipped my phone out of my pocket. I opened the encrypted messaging app I used to communicate with the private security firm I had hired 3 days ago. I typed a single line, ready for implementation. "Initiate plan, Alpha at 0300 hours." I hit send. As the party wound down around midnight, the guests began to stumble out to their cars. The house was left with the stale smell of spilled alcohol and betrayal. Kevin and Sasha stood by the entrance to the glass gallery leading to the West Wing. "Well," Kevin said, loosening his tie, "what a night. I think the team is really energized." "It was a lovely party, Kevin," I said. My voice was calm, almost melodic. "You must be exhausted." "We are," Sasha chimed in, fingering the necklace at her throat. "Kevin and I need to go over the final budget numbers while the adrenaline is still high. We will probably crash in the guest suite so we do not wake you up coming back in." "That makes sense," I said. "Efficiency is key." I looked at Kevin one last time. I looked at the man I had vowed to love and cherish. I looked for any trace of the person I thought I had married. I saw nothing but a stranger with a thief's smile. "Good night, Kevin." "Good night, Sasher." I said, "Sleep tight." "Night, hun," Kevin said, turning his back on me. I watched them walk down the long hallway. I waited until they passed through the double doors of the west wing. I waited until I heard the heavy click of the latch. Then I turned off the lights in the main hall. I did not go to sleep. I went to my office and sat in the dark, watching the digital clock on my desk. The numbers glowed red in the silence. 12:15, 12:30. The time for pretending was over. The time for reckoning was approaching. I had given them the party. Now I was going to give them the hangover. At exactly 3:00 in the morning, the silent alarm on my bedside table pulsed once, a soft blue light that signaled the start of the new day. I did not wake up because I had not slept. I had spent the last 3 hours lying perfectly still in the darkness, listening to the house settle and breathing in the anticipation of what was to come. I sat up and reached for my tablet, the cool metal casing feeling heavy and substantial in my hand. The screen flared to life, casting a ghostly illumination across my duvet. I opened the security application and selected the live feed from the West Wing master bedroom. The infrared camera painted the scene in shades of gray and white. There they were. Kevin was sprawled on his back, mouth slightly open, an arm thrown carelessly over his eyes beside him. Sasher, or Moniker, as the federal warrant identified her, was curled into a tight ball, clutching a pillow. They looked peaceful. They looked like a normal couple enjoying a deep, restorative sleep in a luxury suite. It was a pity that their comfort was about to expire. I swiped to the master control panel of the Broadwell estate mainframe. This system controlled everything from the temperature of the wine cellar to the hydraulic pressure of the front gates. For the past 5 years, Kevin had enjoyed resident status, a tier of access that allowed him to control the lights, the music, and the garage doors. He loved showing it off to his friends, tapping his phone to dim the chandeliers. I tapped the icon next to his name. A menu popped up with several options. I selected Revoke All Privileges. A confirmation box appeared. "Are you sure you want to delete? Use a Kevin Broadwell. This action is irreversible without admin authorization." I tapped yes without a millisecond of hesitation. Next, I went to the environmental controls. The West Wing was designed to be autonomous, but it was still tethered to the main house by a central corridor and a shared ventilation system. I engaged the emergency isolation protocol. This was a feature my grandfather had installed during the Cold War scare, designed to seal off sections of the house in case of a chemical attack. Deep inside the walls, heavy steel dampers slammed shut, cutting off the airflow between the main residence and the guest suite. The magnetic locks on the heavy oak double doors connecting the gallery to the main house engaged with a dull, heavy thud that reverberated through the floorboards. It was a sound of finality. The West Wing was no longer a guest suite. It was an island, and I had just cut the bridge. I slipped out of bed and dressed in a pair of black yoga pants and a cashmere hoodie. I needed to be comfortable for the physical labor ahead. I walked downstairs to the service entrance at the back of the house. I disarmed the perimeter alarm for that specific door and opened it. Standing in the driveway were 3 vans with no markings. A man named Mr. Stone stepped out. He was a specialist I had contacted 48 hours ago. His company did not advertise in the phone book. They handled security upgrades for banks and embassies. "Mrs. Broadwell," he said, nodding respectfully. "We are ready. You have the specifications?" I asked. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. Biometric deadbolts for the main entrances, reinforced strike plates for the service doors, and a complete recode of the gate motors. "We will have the mechanical key swap out in 45 minutes. Get to work," I said, "and please try to keep the drilling noise to a minimum. We have guests sleeping in the West Wing." Mr. Stone signaled his team, and they dispersed like shadows. I watched them go, then turned my attention to the garage. For the past 2 days, whenever Kevin was at work or distracted by his mistress, I had been slowly moving his possessions. I had taken his golf clubs, his collection of limited edition sneakers, his designer suits, and his boxes of personal files. I had stored them in the climate-controlled storage room off the garage. Now it was time for them to be returned to him. I grabbed a dolly and began the work. I wheeled the boxes out of the storage room and around the side of the house to the sprawling lawn that sat directly in front of the West Wing's patio doors. The night air was crisp and smelled of damp earth. I dumped the first box onto the grass. It contained his college trophies and a collection of signed baseballs he was incredibly proud of. Next came his wardrobe. I pulled armfuls of Italian wool suits and silk ties from the garment bags and tossed them onto the lawn. I did not fold them. I did not arrange them. I created a pile, a chaotic mountain of fabric and leather. I went back for the golf clubs. I unzipped the bag and scattered the irons and woods across the turf like fallen branches. I took the box containing his PlayStation and his expensive noise-canceling headphones and placed them gently on top of the pile, ensuring they were fully exposed to the elements. It took me an hour to empty the storage room. By the time I was finished, the lawn looked like the aftermath of a natural disaster. Kevin's entire material life was spread out over 200 square feet of manicured fescue grass. I checked my watch. It was 4:15 in the morning. I pulled out my phone and opened the irrigation app. The estate sprinkler system was divided into zones. The lawn in front of the West Wing was designated as Zone 4. I adjusted the schedule. Usually, the sprinklers ran for 20 minutes at 5 in the morning on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I changed the setting to daily. I set the duration to 1 hour, and I set the start time for 4:30. 15 minutes from now, I walked back into the house, locking the service door behind me. The locksmiths were just finishing up. Mr. Stone handed me a set of heavy brass keys and a master key card. "The perimeter is secure," he said. "The old keys will not even turn in the cylinders. The gate codes have been scrambled. The only way in or out is with this card or your fingerprint." "Thank you," I said. "Send the bill to the corporate account." They left as quietly as they had arrived. I was alone again. I went to the kitchen and brewed a fresh pot of coffee. The aroma of roasted beans filled the silent kitchen. Grounding me, I poured a cup, black, and carried it up to the balcony off my master bedroom. From this vantage point, I had a perfect view of the West Wing and the lawn below. I sat down on the wicker chair and wrapped my hands around the warm mug. The sky to the east was beginning to turn a bruised purple, hinting at the sunrise. The world was still asleep, but the machinery of my revenge was humming beneath the surface. At exactly 4:30, a soft hiss cut through the silence. Pop, pop, pop. The sprinkler heads rose from the grass like mechanical soldiers. A second later, the water began to arc through the air. It was a beautiful sight. The water hit the pile of clothes with a rhythmic slapping sound. I watched as the expensive wool of his suits darkened, soaking up the moisture. I watched as the cardboard boxes containing his files began to sag and collapse. I watched as the water droomed against the leather of his golf bag. Inside the West Wing, behind the soundproof glass and the blackout curtains, Kevin and Sasha were still sleeping, completely unaware that their exit strategy had just been washed away. They were warm, dry, and arrogant. But outside, the tide had turned. I took a sip of coffee. It was the best cup I had ever tasted. I settled back into the chair, my eyes fixed on the soaking pile of debris below. The sun would be up in 2 hours, and when it rose, it would shine on a brand new world, one where I was the architect, and Kevin was just a man standing in the rain without a key. The sun broke over the horizon at 7:00, bathing the estate in a cheerful golden light that felt entirely inappropriate for the misery about to unfold below. I was still on my balcony, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, watching the monitors on my tablet like a director reviewing the dailies. Inside the West Wing, the movement began. Kevin was the first to stir. I watched on the screen as he sat up, rubbing his temples. A hangover was evidently kicking in. He nudged Sasha, who groaned and pulled the duvet over her head. They looked less like the power couple of the century and more like two teenagers waking up after a frat party. "Offie," I heard Kevin mumble through the surveillance audio. "Janet usually has the Kona blend ready by now, and I need aspirin. Just go get it." Sasha's voice was muffled by the pillow. "And bring me a croissant if the chef is here." The entitlement was breathtaking. After plotting to institutionalize me and steal my fortune, they still expected me to provide breakfast pastries. Kevin shuffled out of bed, wearing only his silk boxer shorts. He walked out of the bedroom and down the short hallway that connected the guest suite to the main house. He approached the heavy oak double doors, expecting them to yield as they always did. He reached for the brass handle and turned it. It did not budge. He frowned, twisting it harder. The door was solid, immovable, held in place by the magnetic locks I had engaged hours ago. "What the hell?" Kevin muttered. He looked at the keypad mounted on the wall. It was a sleek glass panel interface. He punched in his 4-digit code his birthday. Naturally, usually, the panel would glow green and the lock would disengage with a soft click. Today, the panel flashed a harsh, angry red. A robotic female voice, cool and detached, emanated from the speaker. "Access denied. Code invalid." Kevin stared at the pad. He shook his head, assuming he had mistyped in his groggy state. He typed it again, slower this time, stabbing each number with his finger. "Access denied. Code invalid." "Come on," Kevin hissed, slapping the wall. "Stupid glitch." He pressed his thumb against the biometric scanner. This was the fail-safe. Fingerprints do not lie, and they do not change overnight. The scanner beamed a blue light across his thumb. The system processed for a second, the circle spinning on the screen. Then the voice returned louder this time. "Biometric mismatch. Subject unknown. Security alert logged." "Unknown." Kevin yelled at the machine. "I am the husband. I live here." He kicked the door. It was solid oak. It hurt his foot more than it hurt the wood. He hopped on one leg, cursing. Sasha appeared in the hallway, wrapping a robe around herself. "What is all the noise?" "My head is splitting." "The door is jammed," Kevin said, his face flushing pink. "The system is glitching out. It does not recognize my prince. Janet must have messed with the settings when she did an update or something. She is hopeless with technology." "Well, go around," Sasha snapped. "Go out the patio doors and walk around to the front door." "I need caffeine, Kevin." "Right. Good idea," Kevin said. I watched them turn around and head back through the guest living room. They approached the large glass sliding doors that opened onto the West Wing's private patio and the lawn beyond. Kevin unlocked the latch and slid the door open. They stepped out into the morning air. The first thing Kevin noticed was the squelch. The lawn was saturated. The soil was a muddy sponge. He looked down at his bare feet, which were sinking into the wet grass. Then he looked up. The scream that left his throat was a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. It was not the scream of a man in physical pain. It was the scream of a materialist watching his idols destroyed. Spread across the lawn, glistening in the morning sun, was the wreckage of his ego. The pile of Italian suits I had dumped earlier was now a sodden mound of wool and silk, flattened by an hour of Hypress water. His limited edition sneakers were filled with mud. The cardboard boxes had disintegrated, leaving pulpy white streaks of paper across the grass. And there, right on top, sat his prized golf bag. The leather was dark and waterlogged. The irons were rusting in the morning dew. "My clubs," Kevin wailed, running out onto the wet grass, splashing mud up his legs. "My suits. What happened? What is this?" Sasha stepped out tentatively, her face twisting in confusion. "Is that your PlayStation?" Kevin fell to his knees beside the pile, picking up a dripping Armani jacket. It hung from his hands like a dead animal, heavy and shapeless. "Who did this?" He roared, spinning around to face the main house. Janet. Janet. He ran toward the main building. The architecture of the house meant that the West Wing had its own separate entrance. But to get to the main front door, he had to cross the lawn and go through the side gate of the courtyard. He reached the courtyard gate. It was a wrought iron masterpiece, usually purely decorative. Today, the electronic deadbolt I had installed was engaged. Kevin rattled the gate. It held fast. "Janet," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Open this gate. This is not funny. My clothes are ruined." He looked up at the windows of the main house. The curtains were drawn, reflecting the sunlight. The house looked like a fortress, silent and imposing. By now, the noise was attracting attention. Our estate is large, but the properties in this neighborhood border each other. To the left, I saw Mrs. Higgins, the neighborhood gossip, who walked her 2 corgis at 7:15 sharp every morning, stop on the public road outside our main fence. She peered through the iron bars of the perimeter fence, watching the spectacle of a half-naked man screaming in a muddy lawn. Kevin saw her too. He waved his arms. "Mrs. Higgins, call the police. My wife has gone crazy. She locked me out." Mrs. Higgins did not call the police. She did exactly what I expected her to do. She pulled out her phone and started recording. Sasha, meanwhile, had realized something far more terrifying than wet clothes. She had walked to the edge of the driveway, looking toward the main exit gates of the estate, the massive 12T iron gates that led to the public road. They were closed. Usually, they automatically opened at 6:30 for the staff. Sasha ran to the keypad on the brick pillar next to the driveway. She punched in a code. Nothing happened. She tried to push the manual release button. Nothing. She turned back to Kevin, her face pale. "Kevin, the gates are locked. We can't get out." Kevin ignored her, still banging on the courtyard gate. "Janet, open this door right now, or I swear to God I will sue you." Sasha grabbed his arm, shaking him. "Kevin, listen to me. We are trapped. We can't get into the main house and we can't get off the property. We are stuck in the yard." Kevin stopped banging. The reality of the situation began to sink in. He looked at the locked door in front of him. He looked at the locked gates behind him. He looked at the wet pile of his belongings. He looked up at the house again. "This isn't a glitch," he whispered. "No, you idiot." "It is not a glitch," Sasha hissed. "She knows. She knows everything." Suddenly, a high-pitched feedback whine cut through the air. It came from the hidden speakers mounted in the rockery and the trees. The high-fidelity landscape sound system Kevin had insisted we install for his pool parties. Kevin and Sasha froze. They looked around trying to find the source. Then my voice filled the air. I spoke into the microphone on my desk, keeping my tone calm, measured, and terrifyingly polite. The sound echoed across the lawn, booming like the voice of a god. "Good morning, intruders." Kevin's head snapped up toward the balcony where I was sitting, though he couldn't see me through the privacy screen. "Janet," he yelled. "Janet, stop this. Let us in. It is freezing out here." I pressed the button to speak again. "I am afraid that is impossible. You see, the biometric system is working perfectly. It is designed to protect the residents of the Broadwell estate from unauthorized personnel. And as of 3:00 this morning, neither of you are residents. I am your husband." Kevin screamed, his voice shaking with a mix of rage and cold. "Correction," I said, my voice smooth over the speakers. "You are an unauthorized occupant currently trespassing on private property. And you, Sasha, or should I say moniker, the hospitality period has officially ended." Sasha gasped, clutching her rope tighter. She looked at the camera lens hidden in the birdhouse near the patio, realizing for the first time that she was being watched. "You have 5 minutes to assess the damage to your wardrobe," I continued. "I suggest you find something dry to wear, although I doubt you will find much." The sprinklers were quite thorough. "You can't do this," Kevin shouted, tears of frustration starting to well in his eyes. "This is illegal. You can't lock me out of my own house." "It is not your house, Kevin," I replied, allowing a hint of steel to enter my voice. "It never was. It was just a place you were allowed to stay while you pretended to love me. But the show is over, and I have canceled your season pass." I released the talk button and leaned back in my chair. Below me, Kevin was kicking the mud, looking small and pathetic. Sasha was pacing, biting her nails, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal. They were awake now. The dream was dead, and the nightmare was just beginning. Kevin stopped pacing. He pulled his phone from the pocket of his sodden robe, his hands shaking so violently that he nearly dropped the device into the mud. He looked up at the camera lens, his face twisted into a mask of desperate bravado. "I am dialing 911. Janet," he screamed, pointing a finger at the lens as if it were my face. "Do you hear me? I am calling the police. This is false imprisonment. This is domestic abuse. You are going to jail for this." I leaned forward in my chair on the balcony, pressing the talk button on the console. My voice floated down to them, calm and devoid of fear. "By all means, make the call." "Kevin," I said, although to save you the trouble I should inform you that I have already contacted the authorities. I called the non-emergency line 10 minutes ago. I reported 2 individuals trespassing on the grounds and unauthorized possession of stolen property. They said a patrol car is about 5 minutes away." Kevin laughed, a harsh barking sound that echoed off the wet pavement. "Trespassing? Are you insane? This is my house. We are married. You can't trespass in your own home. You crazy witch. It is community property. Everything here is half mine. The police will laugh in your face, and then they will force you to open this gate." He turned to Sasha, seeking validation. "She thinks she can kick me out. It is marital assets. California is a community property state. She can't do a thing." Sasha did not look convinced. She was shivering, hugging her arms around her chest, staring at the main gate with wide, terrified eyes. Just then, a sleek black town car rolled silently up the driveway on the other side of the main gate. It stopped just inches from the iron bars. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. It was not the police. It was Arthur Harrison. He was wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than Kevin's annual salary. And despite the early hour, he looked impeccable. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand and a thick manila envelope in the other. He walked to the gate with the slow, deliberate stride of a man who owns the pavement he walks on. Kevin rushed to the bars, gripping the cold iron. "Arthur, thank God. Look at this. Janet has lost her mind. She locked us out. She destroyed my clothes. You need to tell her to open this gate right now, or I'm suing her for everything she is worth." Arthur stopped 2 feet from the gate. He did not smile. He did not extend a hand. He looked at Kevin with the same expression one might use when looking at a stain on a rug. "Good morning, Mr. Broadwell," Arthur said. His voice was not amplified, but it carried perfectly in the morning stillness. "I am afraid I cannot advise Mrs. Broadwell to open the gate. That would compromise the security of the estate." "Security?" Kevin sputtered. Stop playing games. I am her husband. I own half of this place." Arthur sighed. He opened the manila envelope and pulled out a document. It was thick, bound in blue paper. He rolled it up slightly and slid it through the gap in the iron bars. It fell onto the wet driveway at Kevin's feet with a heavy slap. "I suggest you refresh your memory regarding the prenuptial agreement you signed 4 years ago." Arthur said specifically, "I draw your attention to clause 14b subsection 3. Kevin looked down at the document. He didn't pick it up immediately. "The prenup, that thing was just a formality. Janet said it was just to keep her father happy." "Janet is a very prudent woman," Arthur corrected. "And you, unfortunately, are a very careless reader." Kevin snatched up the document. His wet fingers fumbled with the pages. Clause 14b. Arthur recited from memory. His tone bore the infidelity forfeit clause. It states that in the event of proven adultery defined as sexual relations with a person other than the spouse documented by irrefutable evidence, the offending party forfeits all claims to marital assets, alimony, and residency rights. Furthermore, any gifts given during the marriage are retroactively revoked, and the offending party is liable for a reputation damage fee of $500,000. Kevin froze. He stared at the page, his eyes darting back and forth. "This can't be legal. No judge would enforce this. It is unconscionable. It was drafted by my firm, reviewed by 3 independent judges during the notarization process, and you signed it in the presence of your own legal counsel." Arthur said, "It is as ironclad as the gate you are standing behind." "And regarding the evidence, Mrs. Broadwell has provided us with 40 hours of high-definition video and audio recordings from the West Wing. We have you on tape, Kevin, in bed discussing how you plan to steal her company. We have everything." Kevin's face went gray. The bluster evaporated, replaced by the hollow look of a man watching his future dissolve. "But the house, the investments—" "You owe nothing," Arthur said ruthlessly. "Technically, you owe Mrs. Broadwell for the robe you are currently wearing. That is charged to the house account, which makes it her property. You are effectively shoplifting right now." Sasha, who had been listening in stunned silence, suddenly stepped away from Kevin as if he were radioactive. She took a step toward the gate, clasping her hands together in a pleading gesture. "Sir," she called out to Arthur, her voice trembling. "Sir, please. I didn't know. I had no idea he was married. He told me he was separated. He told me this was his house. I am a victim here. I just want to leave. Please just open the gate and let me go. I won't say anything to anyone." I pressed the talk button again. I could not let that slide. "Oh, stop it, Monica," I said, my voice cutting through her performance. "You lived in my house for 3 weeks. You ate my food. You used my monogram towels. You saw the wedding photos in the hallway before you made Kevin take them down. Do not insult my intelligence by playing the innocent flower." Sasha spun around, glaring at the house, her mask slipping. "You illegally recorded us. That is a violation of privacy. I will sue you." "Actually," Arthur interjected smoothly, "the West Wing is legally classified as a commercial workspace within the estate, as Kevin insisted on designating it for tax purposes last year. Therefore, surveillance is perfectly legal for security monitoring. You have no expectation of privacy in a corporate office. MS. Stevens." Kevin dropped the contract into the mud. He looked at Arthur, then up at the house, then back at Sasha. The trap was perfect. There were no loopholes. There was no escape. "Arthur," Kevin pleaded, his voice cracking. "Come on. We have known each other for years. You can't leave me out here. I have no money. I have no car. My phone is about to die." "That sounds like a personal problem," Arthur said, checking his watch. "The police should be here in 2 minutes. I have prepared the evidentiary packet for them. It includes the trespassing complaint and the affidavit regarding the theft of the diamond necklace MS. Stevens is currently wearing." Sasha clutched her throat, realizing she was still wearing the evidence. She tried to unclasp it, but her hands were shaking too hard. "We are done here," Arthur said. He turned his back on them and walked back to his car, looking for all the world like he had just finished a mild business transaction rather than dismantling the man's life. Kevin slammed his fists against the bars, screaming incoherently, but it was too late. In the distance, the wail of sirens began to rise, cutting through the morning air. They were getting closer, and for the first time in his life, Kevin Broadwell was about to face the consequences of his own actions. Without a wife to hide behind, Arthur paused with his hand on the door handle of his sedan. He turned back, his expression unreadable behind his wire-rimmed spectacles, as if he had just remembered a minor administrative detail like a forgotten trickling receipt. "Oh, and Kevin," Arthur called out, his voice cutting through the rising murmur of the gathering crowd on the street. "Before the police arrived to take your statement regarding the trespassing, you might want to prepare an explanation for the FBI regarding the Aspen property." Kevin, who had been busy trying to wipe mud off his legs with a ruined silk handkerchief, froze. His head snapped up. "What are you talking about?" Arthur reached into his briefcase one last time and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He did not walk back to the gate. He simply held it up. Even from 20 feet away, the red stamp of fraudulent was visible. "We know about the loan, Kevin," Arthur said. "We know about the $2 million you borrowed against the vacation home 3 months ago. We know you forged Janet's signature on the deed of trust, and we know that the notary you used is currently cooperating with the district attorney in exchange for a reduced sentence." The color drained from Kevin's face so completely that he looked like a wax figure melting in the sun. He gripped the iron bars of the gate, his knuckles white. "That was an investment," Kevin stammered, his voice pitching high with panic. "I did not steal it. I leveraged the asset to invest in a high-yield cryptocurrency venture. It was a surprise I was doing it for us, Janet. I wanted to double our net worth before our anniversary. It was for our future. For our future," I repeated over the loudspeaker. "That is an interesting interpretation of events, Kevin, because according to the conversation you had last Tuesday night while drinking my father's scotch, your version of the future looked quite different." I picked up the remote control for the outdoor entertainment system. On the far side of the lawn, mounted on the wall of the pool house, was a 200 in weatherproof LED screen. Kevin had insisted we buy it last summer so he could watch football games while floating on a raft. It was the brightest, most expensive screen on the market, capable of displaying crystal clear images, even in direct sunlight. I pressed the power button. The screen flared to life. I selected the video file titled The Exit Strategy. The audio boomed across the estate, louder than the previous announcement. It echoed off the neighboring mansions. On the screen, a hide video played. It showed Kevin and Sasha sitting in the West Wing living room. They were laughing, clinking glasses. "She is such a stupid goose," Kevin on the screen said, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. "I tell her I'm working late, and she actually makes me a sandwich to take to the office. She has no idea I am just moving the money into the Cayman account." The real Kevin, standing in the mud, watched his digital self with a look of horror, and they asked for the loan. Sasha's voice on the screen was sharp and clear. "When do we get the cash?" "It cleared yesterday." The digital Kevin bragged, $2 million tax-free. "As soon as the transfer hits the offshore shell company, we are gone. I will leave a note. Maybe I will leave her the dog. Oh wait, we do not have a dog. I will leave her the bills then." The crowd of neighbors gathered outside the gate gasped. It was a collective sound of shock and judgment. Mrs. Higgins, who was still recording, audibly whispered, "Oh my God." The mailman who had just pulled up turned off his engine to watch. "I cannot wait to see her face when the bank comes to foreclose." Sasha on the screen giggled. "Do you think she will cry?" "She will crumble." Kevin sneered. "She is weak. She needs me to tell her what to do. Without me, she is nothing." I hit the pause button, freezing the image of Kevin's sneering face on the giant screen for all the world to see. "Weak," I said into the microphone. "That is what you called me. But it seems the weak one is the man who had to steal his wife's identity because he was too incompetent to make his own money." Kevin turned to face the street. He saw the neighbors. He saw the phones pointed at him. He saw the disgust on the faces of the people he had spent years trying to impress. He had always wanted to be the talk of the town. Now Sasha was sobbing now, hiding her face in her hands. But the microphone caught every sound. "Turn it off. Please turn it off." Suddenly, a sharp ping sounded from Kevin's pocket. It was the distinctive chime of a priority banking alert. Kevin moved automatically, conditioned by years of checking his portfolio. He pulled the phone out with trembling fingers. He stared at the screen. I knew exactly what he was reading because I had received the confirmation email 5 minutes ago. Alert: First National Bank status. All accounts frozen. Reason suspicious activity report. Federal investigation 8,842. Available balance. "My money," Kevin whispered. He tapped the screen frantically. "My accounts. I can't log in. It says access revoked." "You do not have any money, Kevin." I said you have frozen assets pending a federal investigation into wire fraud and money laundering. You see, when Arthur found out about the forged loan, we were obligated to report it to the authorities to protect the estate. The bank takes a very dim view of people who move large sums of illicitly obtained cash. They tend to lock everything down: checking, savings, investment portfolios, even that secret emergency fund you thought I did not know about." Kevin looked at the phone. Then he threw it into the mud. It landed with a wet splat next to his ruined golf bag. He stood there barefoot in the cold muck, wearing a soaking wet bathrobe. The $2 million was gone, lost in his bad cryptobit. His personal savings were frozen. His reputation was incinerated. The house he claimed to own was a fortress he could not enter. The wife he planned to leave had just publicly eviscerated him. He turned to Sasha, looking for an ally, but she was backing away from him, her eyes fixed on the approaching police sirens. She knew a sinking ship when she saw one, and Kevin was the Titanic. "I have nothing," Kevin stammered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the approaching sirens. "Correction," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "You have a very expensive legal battle ahead of you, and I advise you to find a public defender, Kevin, because I do not think you can afford Arthur's hourly rate anymore." The wail of the sirens reached a crescendo as 2 police cruisers turned the corner, their lights flashing red and blue against the morning sky. They pulled up right behind Arthur's town car. I stood up and walked to the edge of the balcony, looking down at the man who had promised to love me until death did us part. He looked up at me, his eyes hollow, stripping away the arrogance to reveal the terrified fraud underneath. "Game over," Kevin, I said softly, not into the microphone, but just for myself. The officers stepped out of their cars, hands resting on their belts. The show was concluding, but the final act of justice was just about to be served. The arrival of the first police cruiser usually signals the end of the drama, but in this case, it was merely the intermission before the grand finale. The local officers stepped out of their vehicle, their hands resting on their holsters, looking at the scene with a mixture of professional caution and bewilderment. They saw a hysterical man in a mud-stained bathrobe, a woman cowering near the hedges, and a lawyer who looked like he had just stepped out of a boardroom. Kevin immediately rushed toward the officers, his arms waving frantically. "Thank God you are here," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger up at my balcony. "Officers, arrest that woman. That is my wife. She has locked me out of my own home. She has destroyed thousands of dollars of my personal property. I want to press charges for domestic disturbance and destruction of assets." The older officer, a sergeant with a weary face, held up a hand. "Sir, calm down. We received a call about trespassing and a disturbance of the peace. We need to see some identification. I am Kevin Broadwell." Kevin shrieked. "I live here. My ID is well. It is inside the house that she won't let me into." While Kevin was busy hyperventilating and trying to assert an authority he no longer possessed, a second vehicle turned off the main road and pulled into the driveway. It was not a standard patrol car. It was a black, unmarked Chevrolet Tahoe with government plates. It moved with a heavy, ominous purpose, pulling up right alongside the local police cruiser. Kevin stopped mid-sentence. He looked at the SUV, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. He turned back to the local cops. "Did you call for backup? Good. You are going to need it to get those gates open." He assumed the cavalry had arrived to save him. He assumed that his status as a wealthy white male in a gated community meant that the universe would bend to accommodate his tantrum. The doors of the Tahoe opened. 2 agents stepped out. They were wearing windbreakers with bold yellow letters on the back, but they weren't FBI agents. They were U.S. Marshals. They did not look at Kevin. They did not look at the house. They walked straight past the local police, their eyes locked on one target. "Monica Stevens," the lead marshal barked. His voice was not a question. It was an accusation. Kevin blinked, looking around. "Who there is?" "Nobody named Monica here. This is Sasher. She's a consultant from Meridian Global." Sasher, however, did not look confused. The moment she heard the name, the blood drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. She let out a strangled gasp and did the only thing a guilty animal does when cornered. She ran. She didn't run toward Kevin for protection. She bolted toward the side of the driveway, aiming for a gap in the hedges that led to the neighbor's property. It was a futile effort. She was barefoot, slipping on the wet pavement and wearing a silk robe. Federal agents stopped the marshal, shouted. Sasher scrambled up the small embankment, her nails digging into the dirt. But the second marshal was faster. He vaulted the low stone wall and grabbed her by the arm, spinning her around. She screamed, a high, thin sound of pure terror as he forced her down onto the hood of the Tahoe. "Let me go," she shrieked. "You have the wrong person. My name is Sasha Vance. I have identification. We know exactly who you are." "Ma'am," the marshal said, pulling a set of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "And we have a biometric match to prove it." Kevin stood frozen in the middle of the driveway, his mouth hanging open. He looked at the marshals, then at Sasher, then up at me. "Janet," he whispered, his voice carrying up to the balcony. "What is going on?" I leaned over the railing, looking down at him with pity. "You really didn't check her references, did you, Kevin? You let a stranger into our home, gave her the code to the alarm, and introduced her to your friends. Did you never wonder why she never wanted to use her own credit card for dinner?" I picked up the remote and paused the video of their betrayal on the big screen, letting silence reclaim the yard. "Last Tuesday," I continued, addressing the crowd that had now formed a silent semicircle at the gate. "After you two went to bed, I went down to the kitchen. Sasha had left her wine glass on the counter, a nice Pinot Noir. She left a perfect set of fingerprints on the rim. I put the glass in a Ziploc bag and gave it to Arthur the next morning. He has a contact at the bureau. Arthur nodded solemnly from his place by the gate. "We ran the prints through the national database. It was quite a hit. The system lit up like a Christmas tree." The lead marshal finished securing Sasher's wrists behind her back and turned to address the local police sergeant. "This is Monica Stevens," the marshal announced, his voice loud enough for Kevin to hear every syllable. "She is wanted in Nevada, Arizona, and Texas for 3 counts of grand larceny, 2 counts of insurance fraud, and 4 counts of felony identity theft. She specializes in targeting mid-level corporate executives, engaging in romantic relationships, and then cleaning out their accounts or blackmailing them with fabricated evidence of misconduct." Kevin reeled back as if he had been physically struck. He turned to look at the woman pressed against the hood of the car, the woman he had bought a diamond necklace for, the woman he had destroyed his marriage for, Monica. Kevin stammered, "Is this true? But we are partners. We were going to run away together. You said you loved me. You said I was the only one who understood you." Sasha Monaco lifted her head. Her hair was matted with mud and her face was twisted in a snarl that was ugly to behold. The mask of the sophisticated business consultant was gone, replaced by the hardened glare of a career criminal. "Oh, grow up, Kevin," she spat. "Love you. You are a mediocre salesman with a Napoleon complex and a gambling addiction. You were an easy mark. The only reason I stayed for 3 weeks was because I was waiting for you to access the trust fund." Kevin looked like he was going to vomit. "But the plan, the merger project, we were going to build an empire." Lonergan laughed. It was a cruel hacking sound. "There was no merger, you idiot. I was never going to go to Brazil with you. My plan was to wait until you transferred the stolen money from Janet's account, then threatened to turn you into the SEC unless you gave me 80% of it. I was going to bleed you dry and leave you to rot in prison while I retired to the south of France." The silence that followed was heavy. Kevin swayed on his feet. The reality of his situation crashed down on him with the force of a collapsing building. He hadn't just lost his wife and his home. He had been played. He who thought he was the mastermind, the wolf of the business world, was actually just the sheep. He was the goose all along. "You were going to blackmail me," Kevin whispered, his voice breaking. "I was going to destroy you," Monica said coldly. "Janet just beat me to it. Honestly, I almost respect her for it. At least she has a backbone. You are just pathetic." The marshal shoved Monica into the back of the Tahoe. As she was pushed inside, the sunlight caught the sparkle of the diamond necklace still around her neck. "The necklace Kevin had stolen from me to give to her." "Officer," I called out. "That necklace the suspect is wearing is the stolen property I reported. I trust it will be returned to me as evidence." "Yes, ma'am," the marshal replied, tipping his head toward the balcony. "We will log it and return it to you once the paperwork is filed." Kevin stood alone in the center of the driveway. The local police were now moving toward him, handcuffs unclipped from their belts. He looked at the closed door of the Tahoe. He looked at the closed gate of the estate. He looked at the pile of his wet clothes. He had betrayed me for a fantasy, and the fantasy had just been handcuffed and driven away. He was not a victim of love. He was a victim of his own vanity. And as the realization settled in his eyes, I saw something break inside him. It wasn't heartbreak. It was the total devastating collapse of his ego. "Mr. Broadwell," the local sergeant said, stepping forward, "I need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back. You are under arrest for trespassing, and we have a warrant pending regarding the financial fraud allegations." Kevin didn't fight. He didn't argue. He simply slumped his shoulders and turned around, offering his wrist to the officer. He looked up at me one last time, his eyes pleading, begging for some sign of mercy, some recognition of the 6 years we had spent together. I looked down at him, my face smooth and impassive. I raised my coffee cup in a silent toast, then turned my back on him and walked back into the warmth of my home. The arrest was not a quiet affair. The local police sergeant, having reviewed the stack of documents Arthur Harrison had so helpfully provided, did not hesitate. He walked up to Kevin, who was still standing in the mud, and spun him around. The metallic click of the handcuffs tightening around his wrists was the loudest sound in the world. It cut through the morning bird's song and the distant hum of traffic. It was the sound of a door locking. But this time Kevin was on the wrong side of it. Kevin Broadwell, the sergeant said, his voice flat and practiced. "You are under arrest for trespassing, destruction of property, and on suspicion of bank fraud and felony forgery. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Kevin did not remain silent. As the reality of the situation fractured his mind, he began to scream. It was not a scream of anger anymore. It was the desperate, high-pitched wail of a drowning man. "Janet!" He howled, straining against the officer's grip, twisting his neck to look up at the balcony where I stood. "Janet, baby, please, you can't let them take me. I am your husband. I love you. We have a life together." I watched him with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen in a jar. He looked so small down there, shivering in his dirty bathrobe, his bare feet bleeding slightly from the gravel. "It was her," Kevin screamed, jerking his head toward the black SUV where the marshals were securing Moniker. "It was all her idea. She bewitched me, Janet. She told me she was pregnant. She told me she had cancer. I was just trying to help her. I never stopped loving you. Please tell them to stop. I will sign anything. I will go to therapy. Just open the gate." His words spilled out in a chaotic torrent of lies and conflicting excuses. One moment Moniker was a seductress, the next a charity case. He was grasping at straws, trying to find the one combination of words that would unlock my sympathy. But he had forgotten that I was the one who had changed the codes. I did not shout back. I did not list his crimes or argue with his lies. I simply reached into the pocket of my hoodie and pulled out a thick and cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with a wax stamp, the Broadwell family crest. I held it over the railing. The morning breeze caught the edge of the paper. "Officer," I called out, my voice steady. "My husband seems to be leaving without his travel documents. Could you please ensure he gets this?" I let the envelope go. It fluttered down through the air, spinning slowly before landing with a soft splash in a puddle right next to Kevin's muddy feet. The sergeant looked down at it, then bent to pick it up. He wiped the mud off the surface and looked up at me. "Check the contents, Sergeant," I said. "I want to make sure everything is legal." The officer tore open the seal. He pulled out a sheath of documents. The first was a thick legal file. "It is a petition for divorce," the sergeant noted, glancing at the papers already signed and notarized by the petitioner. "And the rest?" I asked. The officer reached back into the envelope and pulled out a small rectangular slip of paper and a handwritten note. He held them up. "It is a bus ticket," the officer read, raising an eyebrow. "One-way Greyhound. Destination Omaha, Nebraska." Kevin stopped struggling. Omaha was where his parents lived in a 2-bedroom retirement condo. It was the place he had sworn he would never return to, the symbol of the mediocre life he had fought so hard to escape. "And the note," I prompted. The officer cleared his throat and read the note aloud, his voice projecting clearly to the silent neighbors and the gathered crowd. "The note says the hotel service fee for the 3 weeks your mistress stayed in the West Wing is $50,000. I have deducted this amount from the liquid cash you attempted to embezzle. Consider the account settled. Good luck." Kevin stared at the bus ticket in the officer's hand. The fight went out of him, his knees buckled, and he would have collapsed into the mud if the sergeant hadn't held him up. He realized then that I hadn't just beaten him. I had billed him for the inconvenience. "Take him away," the sergeant said to his partner. They dragged Kevin toward the patrol car. He didn't scream anymore. He just wept ugly, heaving sobs that shook his entire body. As they shoved him into the back seat, he looked like a broken child. A moment later, the engines roared to life. The black SUV carrying Monica Stevens, the fake Sasha, peeled out of the driveway first, heading toward a federal holding facility. The patrol carrying Kevin Broadwell followed close behind, heading for the county lockup. They were going to the same destination, ruin, but they would arrive alone. I watched the tail lights disappear around the curve of the road. The siren wails faded into the distance, leaving behind only the chirping of birds and the rhythmic hiss of the sprinklers that were still dutifully watering the pile of trash that used to be Kevin's life. Arthur Harrison stood by the gate, watching the cars leave. He looked up at me and gave a single respectful nod. He adjusted his briefcase, got into his town car, and drove away. The show was over. The audience of neighbors began to disperse, whispering excitedly, already typing out the story on their neighborhood forums. I turned my back on the world. I walked through the glass doors of my bedroom and into the cool, quiet sanctuary of the house. It felt different now. The air was lighter. The oppressive weight of Kevin's ambition and deceit was gone, flushed out like a toxin. I walked to the wall-mounted interface in the hallway. The screen was glowing with the estate status report system. I said aloud. My voice was strong. Listening. The smooth, synthetic voice of the house AI responded. Initiate final purge protocol. I commanded. Delete all user data, biometric records, and preference settings for Kevin Broadwell. Remove him from the family, trust algorithm, and the insurance database. He does not exist. Processing. The AI replied. User Kevin Broadwell has been permanently deleted. Access revoked. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt in months. One more thing, I said. Activate Independence Day mode. Playlist Freedom Volume 100%. Acknowledged. The AI chirped. I stepped through the heavy front doors of the main hall. As I crossed the threshold, I grabbed the heavy brass handle of the massive oak door. I didn't just close it. I put my whole weight into it. I slammed the door shut. Boom! The sound was solid, heavy, and final. It reverberated through the marble foyer, shaking the dust off the chandeliers. It was the sound of a book closing. It was the sound of a vault locking. It was the sound of the rest of my life beginning. There was no forgiveness. There was no second chance. There was only the silence of a house that finally truly belonged to me. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal and ultimate justice. It has been a wild ride, and I hope you enjoyed seeing the plans come together as much as I enjoyed writing them. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening from a busy city, a quiet countryside, or maybe even your own fortress of solitude? Please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on Kevin's fate. Did he get what he deserved? If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Azad Revenge Stories for more tales of calmer served cold. Don't forget to like this video and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people. Your support means the world to us. Stay safe, stay smart, and remember always check the prenup. Thanks to everyone.